Radio, news, music and more.
Israeli troops have entered Shifa, the largest hospital in Gaza, in what it described as a targeted raid against Hamas. The IDF says it has found weaponry in the hospital as it searches for what it claims is a Hamas commander site hidden beneath the facility in secret tunnels, something Hamas denies.
This is based on intelligence operation that is out of necessity that we're carrying out in a very precise and targeted place. We have found already military equipment next to an MRI machine and inside the corridors of the hospital.
That's IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Amnon Shifa speaking to the BBC just moments ago. So far, Israel says there hasn't been any fighting inside the hospital grounds and it's conducting a sweep of the facility. But to the outside world, it's unclear what's happening. Even the World Health Organization has lost contact with its staff in the hospital. Dr. Andreas Krieg is a senior lecturer at the School of Security Studies at King's College London and joins us this morning. Thank you, Dr. Krieg, for joining us.
Good morning.
As we just heard, the IDF says it's found weapons at Shifa. What will it mean if its claims are correct that this is indeed a site where Hamas operates from?
Well, it really depends on what further evidence or evidence actually they can produce. So far, we're quite surprised the Israelis have been in that hospital for nearly 24 hours. And usually when they find something, they're quite, quick to placate the evidence anywhere they can find it. I mean, the IDF has really heavily invested in strategic communication over the last month or so, and whatever they find will be immediately released without further checking of evidence. And they haven't released anything, which makes it kind of questionable to what extent they actually have any evidence for that. And also, obviously, this hospital is a protected site. Obviously, if they claim military necessity, they still need to exercise caution and make sure that they're proportionate in their response. And just finding a few weapons somewhere is very different from the claim that the Israelis have made for years. I mean, the narrative has been that Shifa Hospital has been some sort of command center for Hamas. If they can't prove that, it makes it quite questionable to what extent this was actually a legitimate target and whether the damages that were caused to the site as well as to civilians were actually proportionate to the end.
Wow, that's really interesting. So the IDF says this is a targeted operation, and you've just outlined that you don't think they've yet provided the evidence that there's a justification for this raid.
No. So obviously what Israel is trying to do here is it's trying to literally take over every single building because they're saying they want to exterminate Hamas. And also this is a way of deterrence to kind of send a message to Hamas saying they're nowhere safe and the Israelis will turn every place upside down, which is a problematic sort of statement to make. And the statement has been made on Israeli radio over the last couple of days as well. Because obviously this is not just directed at Hamas. In the end of the day, they're basically drawing in civilians, and civilians are those who, mostly take damage and are the ones who suffer through it. So there's always that question of proportionality in that. So yes, you can claim military necessity, but it has to be valuable and has to be valid enough, and it has to be, proportionate enough to the end that you're trying to achieve. Finding a few weapons in a hospital is not necessarily the evidence that Israel needs to produce to kind of legitimize that.
The US has backed Israel's claims. Should we expect intelligence to be shared publicly if they're sanctioning the raid of a hospital?
Well, if it comes to something like that, because as you said, Shifa Hospital is a very, very important part of the infrastructure, of the civilian infrastructure in Gaza. They've targeted the hospital a couple of times already in the environment through, area effect weapons, and now obviously through a targeted infantry raid. When they do that, they have to produce the evidence for it. And obviously the Americans, and I would say the Americans, obviously there's something that we call the Five Eyes community, which is the English-speaking world plus Israel, that Australia is in that as well. So we would expect intelligence to be shared, and I don't think that the Americans have any better intelligence than the Israelis, because the Israelis are on the ground. They've got human intelligence, they do have signal intelligence, they have video intelligence from drones, but what they don't have is a view to the battlefield underneath the hospital. So there are two battlefields here, one overground and one underground, and the whole claims that were made, all these claims were made over the last couple of days, refer to below ground, and it seems the Israelis don't have the full picture of what's going on, and they don't have good intelligence on that.
So how can we possibly verify anything presented as evidence?
That is the big problem here. I mean, we're in this war over narratives where obviously both sides, the Israelis and Hamas, are, parties to a conflict. They have a motive to obviously skew evidence and information a way to make themselves look good. And we have to exercise a lot of scrutiny over claims coming from Hamas as well as claims coming from the IDF. We have no way to independently verify. Even those journalists that embed with the IDF and are on the ground only have limited access and are only allowed to broadcast whatever the IDF allows to be broadcast. So we're kind of, for the great part here, we're kind of in the shadow of an information environment that is extremely constrained. But it is very important that if Israel is making all these claims, that they back them up. Because unfortunately, over the last couple of weeks, they made a lot of claims that they didn't back up, or when they did back them up, they backed them up with false information or disinformation. And that obviously has a major problem for the legitimacy of IDF operations.
So when the IDF says that there is unequivocal proof that Hamas used the Al-Shifa hospital, you're saying there isn't?
I haven't seen it yet, and nobody has seen that evidence. And to be honest, the IDF has produced evidence for much smaller, much more minor claims, such as some of the other hospitals saying there are certain shafts and tunnels going in there. If Al-Shifa Hospital, and that's the problem here, is that we have evidence from people who work in Al-Shifa Hospital who are not a party to the conflict, who are not affiliated with Hamas, people who work for international NGOs, Westerners, who all made the same claim over years, by the way, because this narrative about Shifa Hospital being a command and control center for Hamas has been going around for years. And we have independent voices who for years have said, this is not true. There are no Hamas people in that building. There is no control center in that hospital. And now is the time, the moment of truth, where Israel could come forward and say, actually, we went in and here's the proof. That's what we've been talking about. They haven't done it. And the fact that they haven't done it after 24 hours they came in suggests to me that they don't have anything.
And that points me to the obvious question. If you think they don't have it or they haven't yet demonstrated it, what does that mean for the kind of operation that they're undertaking?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, this is always that narrative of Israel being the most moral army in the world. And it seems like that narrative is becoming, increasingly shallow and difficult to hold. I mean, there have been now several instances where Israel has violated international humanitarian law. Obviously, I'm not in any position, neither are any external lawyers in any position to say that a war crime has been committed or not. I think, we have to be very careful about these sort of allegations here. But there will be an investigation eventually. An independent one has to be conducted to actually verify how Israel operated and how it behaved and conducted itself. And it suggests that the way that Israel conducts itself at the moment is not in keeping with how we as Western liberal democracies would conduct warfare, in terms of how we target, in terms of proportionality, in terms of how we stay away from civilian infrastructure and making sure that we differentiate adequately between civilians and combatants. I think the Israelis have, at occasions, dropped the ball when it comes to adequately living up to international humanitarian law.
Dr. Krieg, thank you.
Thank you.